podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Leaving out the avocado in your salad to save money is not good for morale or your fiber intake. Luckily, State Farm knows the value of the little things. It's why they've got options like insuring your home and ride with surprisingly great rates on both. Because you shouldn't have to give up what you love for great insurance. For surprisingly great rates, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Call or go to statefarm.com for a quote today.
Love tennis with Matchpoint Tennis Championships. It's time to take to the courts with a brand new tennis sim, delivering an authentic and dynamic tennis gameplay experience.
Welcome back to the Love Tennis Podlet. I think this is the Day 8 edition. It is a little hard to keep track. I'm James Gray of iNewspaper and iNews.co.uk. I've got George Belshaw, who I'm delighted to say is alive and well, despite concerns that he might have been MIA on Sunday. George, do you have an official written apology that you want to read out?
Yeah, I'd just want to apologise to all the fans, to my colleagues. I've let us all down. And most importantly, I've let myself down. I have been watching lots of tennis, so I have been keeping up, and I've been enjoying the podcasts, and it's been great. But I'm sorry, I've not been contributing as much as I'd have liked to. Damn 30 birthday plans and celebrations and whatever.
I think it's important that we all now concentrate on getting on with the job.
Absolutely, I do.
You know, George has got.
That's what the public want us to do.
It is. It's exactly what they want us to do. George has got the big calls right over the last 2 years, and I think we need to respect that. Even if his family values leave something to be desired. Let's move on. We've got loads to talk about. It was a busy day yesterday. For the first time in a long time, I spent an entire 5-set match sitting in a press box without moving, which I don't think I've ever done. Admittedly, it didn't last very long.
Not even to go to the toilet? That's
literally.
Good effort.
Well, in fairness, it's because Nick Kyrgios and Brandon Nakashima only needed 3 hours, 10 minutes to do 5 sets, so it wasn't a true 5-setter. There were also wins yesterday for Christian Garin, Taylor Fritz and Rafa Nadal. In the women's, Elena Rybakina, Ayla Tomljanovic, Simona Halep and Amanda Anisimova booked their slots in the last 8 to complete the quarter-final draw, which then gets underway today at Wimbledon with Djokovic versus Sinner, Goffin versus Norrie, Maria versus Niemeier and Bouzkova versus Jabeur. George, let's start with yesterday. As I say, Kyrgios and Nakashima, 5 sets. Kyrgios went a set down early on. He started feeling his shoulder. He had a medical timeout. He eventually came through in the 5th set 6-2, having tanked the last game of the 4th set in what he called a rope-a-dope tactic to put his opponent off, and he says that it worked. I guess the main concern is the shoulder. He was feeling it in warm-up. He felt it throughout the first set. He had a medical timeout at the beginning of the second. But immediately after that medical timeout, he smashed down a 136-mile-an-hour ace, so it can't have been bothering him that much.
Well, adrenaline's a powerful thing, James, so I would not... I wouldn't want to say whether it'll be really interesting how he kind of bounces back or not. I mean, the Kyrgios kind of run is really... it's been great for the tournament, I think, in terms of getting eyes on these, went out for dinner yesterday for my housemate's birthday, and people who aren't into tennis are kind of sat there talking about him, and I think that is only good for the sport. I was kind of flashing back to the US hardcourt swing earlier this year when we all were kind of commenting he was actually playing quite well, looking quite up for it, and we sort of did joke then, could Kyrgios win Wimbledon? Is this actually going to happen? Is that going to be the time? And it's really opened up. It's looking great, but the one thing we also said back then is it'll either be a meltdown or an injury that'll stop him. If it, obviously Nadal and Djokovic aside, who are also pretty decently sized obstacles, but you kind of feel they're the things that are going to let him down. And I do worry a little bit about the shoulder now, but I think he's got a great chance against Garin. First quarterfinal for him. Nick's not been past this stage either, so it's a first experience, I suppose, in many ways, whoever comes through. But yeah, I fancy him if he can just hang on to the shoulder, keep it onto his arm, and who knows?
I think he said afterwards when someone asked him about it, he wasn't particularly deflective, but he certainly didn't answer the question straight. He said he woke up after Tsitsipas and had some shoulder pain. I've played so much tennis in the last month and a half, so I almost knew it was time for my body to start feeling some niggles. I think that's normal at this time of the event. I don't think anyone's feeling 100%. Even Rafa, you see him dealing with something niggling all the time. I just don't think there's anyone feeling 100%. It's just something I manage. Now, we often say, and I think it is true, that all tennis players are injured all the time in one shape or form. But I thought it was significant that he didn't say, oh, yeah, I've had this shoulder problem for a while, or, oh, it's something new, or it just felt somehow like he was avoiding the question.
It's quite funny because, like, in commentary, they were talking about that aspect a little bit, about players who show they're injured versus those who don't.
Yeah.
And we've spoken about injuries before. It's like a really hard thing for us to comment on because we're never quite sure of the severity and how debilitating it is and how much it's affecting their actual game. But they were kind of talking about how Rafa he wouldn't have let them see the shoulder if it was just like a niggle. He'd kind of kept it under wraps, hidden it to the bitter end, not talked about it or whatever, which maybe was a little bit unfair on Nick, given we don't know what's going on exactly. But as you say, he could still bolt down some massive serves, but it is often the recovery the days after that really is more telling than on centre court midway through adrenaline pumping. So it's a wait and see, but I don't think he needs to be at his best to beat Garin in many ways. I've not been that, it's not been the toughest draw for Garin. I know he had to work hard against de Minaur, but I think if you're getting de Minaur in the last 16 of a slam, you'd be quite happy, to be honest. I think that's about his kind of ceiling. Maybe that's a little bit harsh.
I think that's incredibly harsh. I mean, Alex de Minaur is a good player on grass. I mean, as Calvin...
He's a good player.
Calvin
for
said
a last 16 tie, I mean, like, that's where you're expecting the best 16 in the world, and he's like low down there. You know what I mean? Like, you'd take that at the start of a tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree with that, but I think beating him in 5 sets, especially having been 2 sets down, is a pretty decent-sized achievement.
It's a great effort.
I think also, on Kyrgios, the treatment he was having yesterday was sort of on the back of his shoulder, flat up by sort of between the neck and the shoulder. And the shot I actually thought he was most hindered on is his backhand, which is not so much a problem because he doesn't really have much of a backhand. But he definitely seemed to be... I mean, I would need to check the backhand speeds, and I don't have access to that data, but I might ask Mark Petchey or someone who might. But he definitely looked like he was softballing the backhand in, because if you think about how you hit a two-handed backhand, that requires a bit more rotation through the kind of back of the shoulder, I think.
Weirdly, his backhand's not that great a rotation. It's quite a weird, like, patty shot. And I've seen him just pat it in quite a lot as well. I mean, I wasn't watching closely enough to kind of be thinking,
which bit of his shoulder was injured.
Yeah. Like, you're always thinking more about the serve. And for me, actually, when I've had shoulder problems, it was one of my many injuries. Actually, kind of high forehands were really painful. Like,
well, fortunately, Kyrgios doesn't really hit a high forehand, so it's not really a problem.
He cocks it from a bit lower, doesn't
exactly.
he? But,
the other thing is on Garin. I think Garin's a pretty bad matchup for Kyrgios. Not in ordinary circumstances. I think if he got him in the first round of Wimbledon, he'd be delighted, because Garin is a clay courter and Kyrgios will probably call him a pusher. But I think Nakashima was a great... incidentally, and I want to put this on record, Brandon Nakashima played great and is going to play some really big matches. But it's a great matchup for Kyrgios, because Nakashima is just Kyrgios but not as good. He's got a really effective serve. I think his serving efficacy was up at 96.7% before that match. He obviously has a decent sized forehand as well and tends to play very short points, to the extent, as I said at the top, that a 5-set match took 3 hours 10 minutes. I mean, Rafa plays some 2-set matches that take that long. I think I'm right in saying that the first 2 sets against Zverev were not far off that.
They were 3 hours and they haven't finished it yet.
No, exactly. I mean, okay, completely different circumstances.
On clay as well, but
and you get my point. I mean, it was stupid quick. Like, the first set was 6-4 and it took 28 minutes. Like, that's just insane. And that did slow down a bit. I thought Kyrgios also looked tired. I think he was, apart from that first set, he was moving incredibly slowly between points, which really isn't his style usually. And I just think if Garin's going to take him, through even 3 or 4 55-minute sets, it's going to start to hurt him.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I think it might have been 2019, 2020, hearing Leighton Hewitt kind of talking about Nick and his biggest problem. Obviously, there's been lots of back and forth in the Davis Cup team for Australia, where there's been fallouts or whatever, shock in an Aussie team. But, he was kind of talking about how it takes you a year to really build up tour fitness in terms of have your body get used to the rigours and like actually playing it all the time. And, as Calvin says, Kyrgios is a little bit of a part-time player in terms of he isn't there week in, week out. And now it is a big test. He's come through 4 best of 5 set matches. He's not done that for 7 years. He's going to have to come through a guy who is going to keep the ball in play a lot. He'll have to break him down a lot. I mean, I think he can overpower Garin, and he might kind of surprise us how well he can get through him, but he'll want to keep that quick, because if he gets through that and it's another 5-set slog, you wouldn't give him much of a chance if it was Nadal kind of turning up there, because he's making fairly light work of people as the tournament progresses, and is just in brilliant form this year. So yeah, I'm still not convinced Nick's gonna win the whole thing, but if we get Djokovic versus Norrie, it would be a lovely British match in one semi-final, and Kyrgios Nadal in the other. I think that can be classed as a pretty exciting lineup heading towards the weekend.
Yeah, agreed. You mentioned Rafa there and what good form he's in, and the movement in terms of the calendar year Grand Slam. I was trying to think back about when we started talking about the calendar year Grand Slam with Djokovic, and actually the answer is about 2020, because I'm pretty sure you said he was going to win the calendar year Grand Slam like about 6 months in advance of the season even starting. So in that sense we're a bit skewed, but maybe we haven't mentioned it because it's kind of crept up on us.
I think the thing with the Djokovic
I mean,
one,
sorry, just for the record, we have mentioned it. It's just that we haven't really been serious about it.
I think the thing is with these guys, there's certain points in the season where it kind of matters more. And I think for Djokovic, it's always the French Open, just because Nadal's so dominant there that for Djokovic to win it, like, you kind of know if he's got a chance or not, if he can kind of overcome that hurdle. Nadal's first hurdle, in many ways, is Australia, because he's not won that for years, and that was almost kind of a bit of a, I don't want to call it an open goal without Djokovic, but that's a massive boost for that tournament. But this is the one, he's only won it a couple of times. Obviously had that epic ding dong with Djokovic back in 2018 in the semis. This is the one that if he wins this, you'd kind of back him to win the US now. Like, from there, I'm not saying I wouldn't back him either way, but this is a massive few days for him. If he can come through, win this title, Djokovic probably won't get to the US Open.
Well, so who else out there's going to stop?
So who else is going to stop this guy? You're looking at Medvedev. He'll be fired up, and that'll be a tough match. But he's come through him in Australia, and you'd argue to say Rafa's better at the US. So yeah, I mean, who knows?
I think I agree with you. I mean, the other thing to consider is that Rafa's got to get to the end of the season. He has obviously huge injury problems at the moment. He's been through a lot of injury problems. The US Open is still some weeks and months away, and he's got to get there unencumbered. I was just talking yesterday, and a story broke last night that Andy Murray's going to go and play Newport on the grass, and then potentially Atlanta and Washington, and then all of the different... George, you just made a face.
There's like some massive roller coming through. Someone got a big suitcase or something.
No, it's just the wind, actually.
Oh, right. Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is one of the things about broadcasting outside. You get lovely ambient noise, and it's a beautiful sunny day. And I'm using my rucksack as a sort of windbreak, but it's not entirely effective. But do let me know if that happens.
It's been doing okay on the whole.
I think so.
I wasn't sure if it was something going on outside my flat, which is why I made the face. There's some building works going on, so...
It's supposed to be a very short-range microphone, but this is one of the things about listening to these podlets is they are raw. I don't edit anything out. It's just as it happens, so you get a bit of experience of what it's like for us doing it, and something a bit different. I think Rafa's got to get to the end of the season, but so is Andy Murray, as I was saying. He's got a massively packed schedule now over the summer to try and get into those top 32 places to get seeded at the US Open, because he doesn't want to draw John Isner in the second round again. I think that is going to have some pretty serious implications for his fitness. Rafa's certainly not going to do that, obviously, because he already is seeded. He already will be seeded. We can be virtually certain of that. I mean, Rafa, he might play one tournament on the hard courts, I reckon. I think, is it Cincinnati he usually plays?
Yeah.
Oh, he plays in Canada quite well, doesn't he? Well, I think it's in Montreal.
Whichever way it is this year.
I think it's in Montreal this year. For people who don't know, the Canadian Masters 1000 hardcourt event, the men's and the women's switch each year between Montreal and Toronto, so no one ever knows actually where it is this year.
We should just call it the Rogers Cup to be safe, shouldn't we?
Yes.
Is that either way?
This is like calling Hertenbosch Rosemarlen.
Yeah.
It's the shorthand to make sure you never really get it wrong. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those situations where we just say we shall see, but if we said we shall see, this would be a very boring podcast.
Are we sitting here now saying we both think Novak's going to win it? I mean, he's been bloody good, hasn't he, as well? Let's be honest. I mean, looks pretty imperial.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to look beyond him. I thought he wasn't perfect against Van Richthofen. Like, I thought...
He played well, though, didn't he?
Yeah, I just, you know, I actually don't... I think if the roof had been open... Because that obviously favours Djokovic, because it is... I mean, Jack Draper said the other day he expected it to be quicker with the roof shut, but, I mean, I don't think he's been watching very much tennis, because it's always slower with the roof shut. It's more humid, the ball gets bigger, the ball just moves more slowly. It's a bit slipperier, which is maybe why he thought it might feel quicker, but it doesn't. And that's always going to suit Djokovic, especially against Van Richthofen, who's one of the biggest servers in the event. So I just thought he didn't move as well as he usually does. There were a few slips and trips, and felt like he just didn't understand the surface as well as he usually does.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, he was a little bit like that last year, but he normally kind of gets that out of his system in the first couple of rounds. There were a couple of quite bad ones, weren't they, where you're kind of watching like, oh, bloody hell. You know, you're thinking about, you know, talking in the context of Nadal potentially winning the calendar Grand Slam, for Novak to like roll his ankle or something and go out of the tournament. I mean, that would be a pretty big gimme for him.
Well, yeah, I have to say I'm not an asterisk guy. I don't like asterisks. But if Djokovic was unable to play Australia and the US and then got injured in Wimbledon, you'd have even I would potentially be penciling in an asterisk there.
Any chance for Sinner today? I know there probably won't be much time for listeners before that match.
But I think he's basically the same player, isn't he? It's sort of the Kyrgios. Calvin says this a lot, and I do like it, which is when you get two players who are very similar and one of them is just better than the other, then like what you can do. Like obviously Djokovic.
Sorry, I lost the sound then for a second.
No, I muted for you to interject deliberately. I hit mute.
Oh, it cut off before you finished speaking. I could see you still going. Yeah, it's a bit weird. We'll leave it in a bit raw. Why not? But yeah, no. Just
for the record, George, I don't want this to become a habit where like we do full length pods and you're just like, let's leave it in. I'm like, no, George. We do some seamless editing that the listeners never see. In some ways, I quite like doing this because it allows me to say that I do all the editing, and the fact that you don't hear more of this is because I work extremely hard at 1 a.m. editing it all out.
Absolutely, and we should definitely have like a little section of the podcast where we praise your production value every week. I think that should be added as a credit at the end.
But what if the guy
under the new song?
What if the guy who actually edits it then just cuts that out?
Yeah. Well, that'd be mean for him to cut himself out, I guess.
Do you think Sinner's got a chance against Djokovic?
No, not really, but he's playing better than I thought he would. I kind of thought he might lose to Wawrinka round 1. That felt like a bit of banana skin. Never looked that comfortable on the grass. But he's impressed me. He did really well against Alcaraz, I thought. I think I wasn't really buying this idea that Alcaraz was one of the top favourites for this tournament, given his kind of inexperience on the grass. And there's still clearly, a bit of a way for him to climb. He'll be there and thereabouts at the US, I'm sure, but on the other surfaces, he's maybe got a little bit of work to do. But yeah, no, I've been impressed with Sinner. I think he's played some good stuff. He's hitting the ball really well. He arguably strikes the ball harder than Djokovic in some ways. He can hit through. He's capable of hitting through him. But on a grass court, I'm just not sure. I really struggle to see Djokovic not making the final, to be honest. Like as good as Goffin and Norrie have been, the draw's kind of fallen apart a little bit. He's avoided Hurkacz. I think he'll be pretty happy with how this has panned out for him. And then one of Kyrgios and Nadal probably in the final. I think he'll feel pretty confident that Kyrgios will either have his body hanging off or Nadal will have his foot hanging off. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to see exactly how Nick Kyrgios stays in one shape for the whole fortnight. That, of course, is one of the advantages of match point tennis championships, is that you don't have to worry about Nick Kyrgios breaking down. As far as I know, the game for which we're very grateful, the sponsorship of this podcast over the championships, I don't think they have injuries in there. I've certainly not got injured. George, I mean, you're made of glass. I imagine your video game character gets injured as well.
I'm yet to be injured. I'm yet to be injured on the game. I had a good tussle with my brother where we played Kyrgios versus Medvedev, and I'm sad to say I went down 6-4, 7-5, which is probably quite realistic a scoreline for Medvedev to be beating Kyrgios.
It's also quite close, you know. I mean,
it was close,
I guess you were both learning the game, so you're sort of on a similar level. But it's quite nice that you were immediately so close.
Yeah, he was a little bit ahead of me. I was kind of just like hanging on to my serve, really. You know, that
right.
My general game wasn't great. It's quite hard actually, like the kind of getting used to like the distances, and it's probably not going to be very useful saying that unless you've actually played the game. But it's quite hard to kind of keep it in the not go long. I think quite often initially, until you get used to like the aiming of it. But it's a brilliant game. Like really, as you say, you said intuitive. I remember when you first talked about it a few weeks ago before I'd played, and I think that's just such a perfect description of it. Like, it's actually, you really feel kind of immersed in the game as you're going through it. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. So thanks to them for bringing this to life, and get playing.
Yeah, and we talk a lot in other sports about how important it is to have a decent video game. It's a really good way to connect with people. You can help tennis move forward by pre-ordering it from Game Now before the 7th of July. It's on PC, Xbox Game Pass it'll be on as well, PlayStation 4 and 5, and it comes out on the 7th of July, so you can pre-order it now. So then make sure you get it on Thursday, or you can buy it on Thursday, but I would pre-order it. And George, I've promised that we will play some online games against listeners if they want to in the week after Wimbledon, so that should be a good laugh. We've not talked very much about the women's draw, which is just insane as usual. George, let's focus kind of on what happened yesterday. Or at least the players we got through. Rybakina, Tomljanovic, Halep and Anisimova. Of those four, who do you think is going to the final?
Oh, that's a good question. This is definitely the stronger half by a long way. Like,
sure. Jabeur just walks the other half.
You'd have thought.
I mean, you know, sort of with the usual WTA caveat, Jabeur walks the bottom half.
Yeah, and you'd hope so for the tournament in many ways as well. I think, you know, she's had such a great year that it's nice for it to be rewarded in a big final. I'd probably lean towards Halep. I thought she played really well against Badosa. Got the experience of kind of winning slams. I think Calvin would be saying Anisimova, who also has played some really good stuff. It was a great win over Goff. I watched that. I watched bits of her against Tan yesterday as well. I mean, Tan, to be honest, we're talking about Dimonor being a decent fourth round opponent. I think Tan's an absolute dream fourth round opponent at the slam, as well as she's done. You know, that's a match that Anisimova was always kind of very likely to go and win. I've got Rybakina is always dangerous. Like, I do always kind of think around this stage, I wouldn't want to be turning up against her. It's a great serve, got a lot about her. And Tomljanovic, you know, she loves the grass. She did really well here last year. I don't think any of the players in that top half should be looking at this draw like, oh, I'd struggle to beat them. I think there's a lot of kind of 49, 51 battles in there. So just to sort of reiterate, when I said who do you think going to the final, you've gone for all four. I've kind of just gone for everyone, haven't I? I will go for Halep. The way she played yesterday was the best performance I've seen in the women's draw so far, against the highest level opponent. But albeit Badosa hasn't got a big match. Like, she hasn't got a big result, has she? Yeah. That's what she needs. Closely followed by Anisimova. And I'm leaning towards them winning the tournament over Jabeur at the minute. Yeah, I'm kind of with you. But it's one of those things where it's like, you know how Djokovic, we sometimes say, oh, he hasn't been tested yet. And it's because actually, oh, here's a windy bit. Here's a very windy bit. And it's actually because he hasn't played anyone decent. Well, he has, but he just made them look really bad. So you're kind of stuck betwixt and between trying to say, oh, he's not been tested. It's like, well, he has, but he just made quite good players look incredibly poor. Yeah. The Mertens match was decent, wasn't it? I mean, that was competitive. You'd expect her to be winning that. But I mean, look, she's beaten 2 qualifiers first 2 rounds. Diane Parry, Mertens. You know, that's a pretty fantastic draw. And then you're looking at Bouzkova, one of Maria or Niemeier, who, Niemeier, another one, James, that you have to say you've been.
I've been banging the Niemeier
she could be dangerous.
So
it'd be nice if she got to the final, or if wins it, you might be able to claim. You always did caveat a little bit carefully with the she should be really good on grass, but I'm not sure she is.
I cannot believe that you are giving me shit for like a caveat. Like the king of the caveat, the caveating pot calling the kettle caveat, sir. Yes, I have been mentioning that she has a chance. It's just because I didn't like her draw, but I should have just forgotten about the draw because it doesn't matter because everyone just loses.
It's pointless, isn't it? I don't even know why I bother looking at the draw for
WTA
fantasy.
Slams this year. Yeah.
When I was listening back to your pod from the other night, I heard you saying this is Ostapenko's, and I was like, yes, I know. That's why I picked her at the start of the tournament, and then of course she lost. Straight away from the moment you think she's actually going to win this thing is of course the moment she lost. But you just give up trying to predict women's tennis, don't you, really?
But we do keep trying, which is the important thing. We do keep trying.
So Halep Jabeur final is what I'm going for if we're sticking with a prediction.
Yeah, I think I do like Calvin's interest in Anisimova. I think she is a good player. I thought she put away Harmony Tan. I know you don't think Harmony Tan's any good, but I watched the Goff match, and actually the only time Goff had any success against her was when she played softball and just played a lot of slice, and Anisimova struggled to pick that ball up and put the pace on it. And I think people might learn from that a bit. I mean, Tan just doesn't have enough maybe to knock her off the court, but it'll be interesting to see how she goes in the quarterfinals, where she's obviously got the pick of the quarterfinals, frankly, against Halep.
I mean, Anisimova, I will be vaguely annoyed if she wins this title, because I obviously picked her at the start of the year in terms of highest ranking climb, and she's already done a bloody good job there. But to then lose 2,000 points for a slam in that competition would feel like a bit of a kick in the
slap in the face. Yeah. I think that's all we've got time for. The wind is starting to get up. The children are starting to arrive on site, which is always means it's going to get noisier. George, thank you very much for finally making it onto a podcast. I'm sure I'll see you again in a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, please do you come back and listen to our next podlet, and do leave us a rating and a review wherever you can. It's been a joy having you as always.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Love tennis with Matchpoint Tennis Championships. Grab your gear and get ready for a brand new title that delivers authentic gameplay and an immersive tennis experience. Pre-order now from Game.